Kate, this is your final critique for Art 828, Creative Photography. Overview, looking at this work, I see very sort of picturesque, almost, postcard-ish type work. And I think that would be a compliment, since that is what you're going for. You're thinking in terms of commercial rendered work. Let's see, looking at this image, I can really see this functioning in a commercial way very well. I like this photograph, the textures, the space, the sign, the juxtaposition of the old buildings, the trees. I even kind of like how the light, it's, I would say, almost technically blown out and needs to be brought back photographically, but for what you're thinking about print and commercial-wise, I think it really kind of works. Has that sort of ethereal feel of this light coming through this composition. And this image, nice trail, nice light. I'm actually a little distracted here by this coming out, and I wish it wasn't there. I'd like to bring that down or re-photograph it. But I like the light, and I like the path, and I like the trail. And that's almost more what I see in these photographs. Anything else is the idea of paths and trails. And maybe that could be a conceptual consideration that you think about as you go on, as you say, you're further capturing this work. Never been to Nantucket, just seen photographs and have had other people in classes from there. I know you took before, but I think there's even someone else who took it. Anyways, with this image, I like the repetition. This actually kind of speaks a little bit differently to me than a sort of typical touristy photograph, be it one a tourist takes or one a tourist would purchase. I like the how it shows, the tombstone. Definitely, you get out on the East Coast, the graveyards there are more interesting than the Midwest in some ways, because they go back so much further in time. There's more of this interaction with them and the environment, and how they have evolved and picked up age, lichens, mosses, and that sort of thing. So you got those nice textural and historical elements juxtaposed to what I see as the newer elements, the telephone poles, the homes. This consideration of this place is a place of inhabitation, and a place that has been inhabited for a very long time, at least in terms and standards of the New World. Very long time. And I like the horizontal lines. We just have these lines throughout here, and then they're juxtaposed by the vertical headstones of different shapes and orders, and the verticality of these the telephone poles, or the electricity poles. And then just a little scattering of residents and homes in here. I like this composition quite a bit, and I would categorize it as the sort of new landscape photography, this interaction of humanity and the environment. And in this case, shows like this many hundreds of years of interaction. And this one gets back to the idea of what I see most of these images being, these sort of paths, and that I think could be a very interesting conceptual contextualization for the images that you're finding on Nantucket. I like how this little path trails off, and we just have all this green intruding in here. And in the end, I can see it working commercially, but also be an interesting image conceptually. Here, looking at this photograph, the leading line of the fence. I wish this was a bit more squared up. I know your camera's probably aiming up and causing it to angle. I'd be tempted to take it into Photoshop and kind of fix that perspective of that. But I like the flag, how they lead with the leading lines of the fence down. Then we have all the trees kind of constraining things. Yeah, the sign, I'm not sure if that's significant or not. It could be help commercially. This is nice, it says plumbing, but that of course creates for most of us this discourse, because it has such a nice, the building seems very Cape Cod-ish, and you know, has a nice architectural element, almost homey feel look to it. I'm telling you, the plumbing supply store here in Kearney, Nebraska is a very industrial feel near the tracks. You know, so it kind of shows maybe how some of these, you know, there are people who live on this island. You know, it's a very touristy island, but there are a small amount of people who live there year round. And it speaks to that sort of infrastructure of the resident who lives there, but how the architecture of that sort of, in my mind, is reflected in a aesthetic manner. So I like the composition. I like how you break it up. I like how the peak of this touches the top of the photograph and breaks up that negative space. Broken up the foreground. There's a nice flow in this image, and I can also see it working as a very commercial image, but it's also just a very nice aesthetic and has some conceptual considerations. I think Jonathan commented he really liked this image. I can see why. I like the, you know, you have the nautical things, you know, this big screw, the propeller for a ship in the foreground, which I can relate to. I grew up in a very nautical sort of place. Even though I was in the Midwest, Duluth, Minnesota is the farthest inland port in the world. And, you know, so we get ocean-going ships, and we have this port, and we have a whole industry of tourism around it, much like, you know, the Nantucket. You know, in some ways relates to Nantucket, but I think it's very different. But, you know, the composition and the light and the splash of colors in the bottles and the windows, and I think works very well here. A little bit of green here, and then these bright colors and the shadows. You know, it is a well-composed photograph and well-thought-out photograph. We look at this image, and you know, I want to like straighten it up. It seems like things are leaning just a little bit. I don't know, but or maybe that's probably actually from the lens, just the distortion through the lens, because we see it kind of fans out here. Like this line is fairly straight, and this one then kind of edges out just a little bit, and that's just distortion from the lens. You know, that could be corrected in Photoshop if one wanted to. I kind of think it might be worth the effort, though I don't want to. I can see pulling this out would then maybe make this touch, and I don't want to break that up. I like that, how that little bit of negative space is where I you know, come around it. Nice repetition of the, you know, very strong vertical lines, some horizontal in the foreground. Excuse me. All right. This photograph, I think, has some qualities, but I think it's one that actually needs to be explored further. Like, you got an interesting subject. There's interesting things going on, but I don't think things are quite perfect as I want them. Maybe you need to go with a longer lens and take a few steps back if that's possible to capture this, or maybe work it in Photoshop. Things just seem just not quite perfect here, and that's, you know, can be maddening and frustrating. And I think it is. Photography, particularly in this day and age, demands perfection. Now, you talked about utilizing these and taking these in a process, a printmaking process now, so that might, you know, actually sometimes that abstraction kind of brings to life and gives an image that might be a little bit, in a sense, sort of flat, and I'm talking emotionally flat, not dynamically flat. Here, it kind of brings that to life, and it might, if you take this image and go through that process that you had talked about earlier, it might bring that emotion back to it, that emotional depth back to it, which is kind of interesting that happens in this process of photography. Sometimes an image that looks flat digitally might work really great in the darkroom, or some other alternative process that a photographer might use. This image here, I like the movement and the flow, and I actually like how this line kind of sags. That is not a distortion. I think that's just reality, and it kind of fits. So I like these lines, and then this line, the green and the green. There's a nice balance to the image. And it's really this saggy sort of line that really captures me and draws me, and it might be something to actually maybe push a little bit and make that the central focus. Maybe if we just select along this line and select this thing and just play with the contrast just a little teeny bit, punch it up just a little bit, make this shadow a little darker. I don't know if I want to make this a little darker. Maybe just shadow a little bit darker. But just add a little punch to this and a little emphasis on that line there. And I think that image is nice as it sits. Now, see, the arbitrary blue, I think, is, I don't know if that's what you're thinking in the end format. Here it doesn't work within the context of what I'm seeing in these other images, just because it's so different. And it's the only one. So, I don't know, this image, like this line in particular, kind of bothers me. But I also kind of like how this goes up at this angle. And I like this little bit of negative space. And I like this, but maybe that's just too much for me, or maybe I'm just, the image feels unresolved and needs further exploration. And maybe that exploration actually happens, and like with that previous one, as you go to get these ready to add a printmaking process to it. This to me is kind of a nice photograph. It feels much more contemporary than some of them. Some of them are playing off that history and the history of the island and the aesthetic of it. The rock here with this writing on here, and then this telephone pole. I see a relationship between those two things: this human, altered natural element, and then this human introduced element to this strong rectilinear line. Fits in this new landscape photography aesthetic, which I see on Facebook. There's a group called that, and I seem to talk about a lot in these videos because I'm looking at it a lot, and it's affecting my thinking. I'm trying to see if it's any different than the new topographics, which happened in the 1970s. Kind of changed landscape photography from this perfect idealism to trying to reconcile humans' interaction in the landscape. And that human interaction happened in Nantucket for a very long time, much longer than in central Nebraska. So I like this image in a very contemporary way, where most of them seem to have this sort of, looking back and the past and playing off that sort of touristy sort of stuff. This one seems to me very much the now. This is the island, and this is how it is. And this one, of course, is similar. I would actually break these two images up. They're very similar in content, subject, and having them right next to each other makes me say, well, choose one of these two. I don't think you necessarily have to choose one, but I would disperse them differently in this portfolio. And then they could speak well. So, all right. I actually like this image. This is probably my favorite. And I know you have a color version here as well. I really like the grayscale version. It has this path that I've talked about throughout this portfolio. But I love how the path kind of goes on and it transitions right to the sky. And there's almost a symmetrical reflection of this and this. This image is really like, I feel a little like off kilter I like that. There's a nice balance, this dark and then this nice middle tone grays and the lights, but that path just kind of flowing like that. Yeah, I really love this photograph. It's my favorite one out of all of them in your portfolio. It also connects, the rocks to the other ones. This image has it all, though. It has the paths, has the rocks, has that new landscape photography feel, while still having that sort of old beach, and habitation feel. And then you have the bikes, which are new, and then the rocks and the path, which feel old. And yeah, I love this photograph. This is my favorite one in the portfolio. It just has everything. And I like the quality here. I like it better in grayscale than I do in color. It seems to enhance that. It's funny, now I see the water here, and I kind of like that I can tell it's water, but I actually really prefer it, the abstraction, where it just feels like the path just kind of goes off into the sky. It is a very nice image, in my opinion. And I think it is one that will translate to this sort of printmaking process. I can see this in a blue tone. I can see it as a cyanotype. I can see it. Just the monochrome, I think, helps exaggerate the abstract qualities of the image. But there's certainly enough objective elements, the bikes, the rock, the trees, to play off that objective and subjective, which is a place I really like photographs to get to. So that, the grayscale, that is my favorite image of them all. This image, I would be curious to see, as you created that sort of sepia quality a couple images ago. I would be curious to see that approach, because I think this image would have a similar feel to step up into the sky, from the beach into the sky. And then if we flatten that out in a sense into a monochrome, I think it would have a really nice feel and playfulness quality to it. I think it works in color too, but I think I'd like it better in grayscale. I'm not sure if that's true of all of these images, though maybe it is. I kind of visualize all of them in a sort of grayscale, though this one wouldn't probably, well, I shouldn't say wouldn't work, but what many of us are reacting to is the color. This one actually I really like the saturation and the color interaction, but it also might work very well in grayscale. So, you know, this image could go either way. And I think most of these images could go either way. So I'd be curious to see what they look like in this final process that you're thinking of applying to these images. But in the end, I think you've got a nice cohesive portfolio. It certainly tells you something of this place. There are some different ways I think it could go, the idea of paths or the idea of all these rocks you know, playing it. Or I think what you actually need to do is disperse the rocks differently. And maybe if it's not going to be all about paths, make sure the paths are dispersed throughout here, though I think they are fairly dispersed. Maybe we need one here. This is a path, this is a path. Maybe stick this image in between these two, and then you got a nice dispersion of paths. And maybe move this over. I don't know, but you know, I could see you just doing all these paths, or I could see you doing it with all these rocks if there are more there. Or they could work together, but I think you need to rearrange them, redisperse the rocks and redisperse the paths, and it can work. It's funny, looking at this, I see like a path here, which I didn't see when I looked at it closer. So, all right, anyways, Kate, those are some of my thoughts on your portfolio, and thanks for taking the class. You know, if you have any questions, whatever, let me know.